I said that the 1920s was a rebuke of the progressive era in a previous video. Well, it's not completely a rebuke. There are going to be some holdovers that are going to happen in the 1920s. For example, in 1919, the 18th Amendment is adopted, which called for the prohibition of the production, sale, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. Now, it goes into effect in 1920 with the Volstead Act. Herbert Hoover called it a noble experiment, and it lasted between 1920 and 1933. It pretty much was an exercise in national hypocrisy, as people voted dry but drank wet. Prohibition will eventually be repealed in 1933. The other one is going to be immigration restriction, keeping people out of the United States because they perceived that they were bringing in problems. It's a negative type of reform. Immigrants were pouring into this nation between the 1880s and 1890s. They were called a new immigration because they came from Southern and Eastern Europe. And along with immigrations come problems like we have talked about before, like being crammed in city slums and workers getting taken advantage of. So how do you solve the problem? How about cut immigration? So in 1924, the United States passes the National Origins Quota Act. Now, your book might refer to it as the National Immigration Act of 1924. This act restricted immigration to the Americas, particularly to 150,000 a year. To give you an idea how little that is, that's about the total of people coming into the United States every month. Then this number was set upon a quota basis, and based on which country where these immigrants are coming from. For example, if the United States said that it wanted 50% of the 150,000 people to come from England, then that's going to be biased towards English immigrants, right? And in fact, the system is going to be eventually biased towards Northern and Western European immigrants. It also prohibited Asian immigration. By this time, we had cut off immigration from China. And in 1927, we told the Japanese that they would not be able to immigrate into the United States as well. A serious insult, and the Japanese government declared that the day that it went into effect in 1927, a national day of shame. These restrictions, by the way, stood until the 1950s. They were not relaxed until after World War II. Immigration restriction was a progressive restriction, but it was negative in the sense that we were telling people who can and could not come into this country. So during the 1920s, political leadership of the country was turned over to big business and pro-business politicians. Business is the best way to provide for the welfare of the entire people, thus the notion of welfare capitalism. Now, if the economy is successful and the country is prosperous, this is a good policy. But what happens if the economy collapses? Those that support it will be blamed. So we will now have to look at the U.S. economy in our upcoming lectures.